Facebook Live. But for those who I haven't met, I'm Curtis Davenport. Welcome to a special edition of Conversations with Curtis. This is a post edition of our very first Netflix watch party here at JazzArts Charlotte. Got confused where I'm coming from JazzArts Charlotte. And this is our post-watch party of what hopefully many of you have just watched, the outstanding documentary that should have gotten, in my opinion, more awards than it did. And that is I Called Him Morgan, all about parts of the life and the unfortunate and tragic demise of one of the greatest trumpeters in jazz, that is the great Lee Morgan. So we are very honored to have you all here, and extra special honored to have my brother, our special guest. First time getting to meet this man. As I told him earlier, I've been a very big admirer of his work for a very long time, also being in jazz radio myself. But I just want to introduce our special guest. He is an educator, he is an author, and a very fine jazz radio host. And also you did see him at various points during the film I Called Him Morgan, and that is Mr. Larry Reni Thomas. Brother Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I was so glad to have you, and here's how it's going to flow tonight, folks. Not that different from what we usually do on Tuesday nights, but Brother Thomas and I are going to chat a little bit about the film, his role in it. We're going to talk a little bit about the outstanding book that he wrote that is an excellent companion to the film, called The Lady Who Shot Lee Morgan. We're also going to talk a little bit about that, his career, and other things about, of course, the great music. And then we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Now, what we'll do this time, we'll ask you, please, when you have questions, please use the raised hand icon. You should have that, and we will let you in. Don't do it too early, though, because it's going to be a while before we get to you with questions, probably about 20 to 30 minutes or so. So just give us a little time to get into the conversation, and we'll get back to you with those questions. But use the raised hand feature, then we'll get you recognized, and we'll ask you, once that happens, to come on and be ready to ask your questions yourselves. So we'll let you do it yourself at that point. With that said, hopefully everyone understands the way we're going to work it. Let me get back to Brother Thomas here and get the conversation started. Of course, about the film. Let me ask you, brother, how did you first become involved in the documentary? Did they contact you? You reached out to them? How did you and these Swedish documentarians meet? It's not exactly like y'all travel in the same neighborhood, as you say you did.
Well, I met Helen Morgan when I was teaching Western Civilization at Shaw University, Cape. Shaw University has these centers all over the state, and one of them was in Wilmington. And I was living in Wilmington at that time, and I was working at a public radio station down there. I was doing a 5 or 6 nighter, WHQR. And as a way of introducing myself to the class, I would hand out this bio. And when she read it, she said, "Oh, I love jazz." She sat in the front row. She said, "Oh, I love jazz. My husband was a jazz musician." And I said, "Really? What was your husband's name?" And she said, "Lee." And her last name was Morgan. And I said, "Lee Morgan, the trumpet player?" She said, "Yes, that was my husband." So I said right then, I said, "Well, I sure would like to interview you one day." And she said, "I'll think about it. I have to think about it." And it took her about 5 or 6 years before she decided to let me interview her. And what I did was I went over to her house and interviewed her. And I didn't know what to do with the interview because I wanted to come back because I wasn't really finished. So I decided that I would write an article. And I posted the article on the internet. And it went from here to Thailand. It's been translated into 6 or 7 different languages, the article. Casper Collin, the filmmaker, read it. And so some kind of way he got my email address, and he contacted me. And he wanted to know that I have a copy of the interview. And I told him, yeah. And would I sell it to him? So I told him, "Oh, yeah, sure." He said, "Well, for how much?" I said, "$100 bucks." So my wife at that time said, "$100 bucks? Are you crazy?" And then there was another guy who contacted me from San Francisco who wanted, I mind you, Cass was the guy who does documentaries. He did the flick, My Name is Albert Isla. So I was contacted by this other guy from San Francisco who wanted to put a Hollywood spin on it. And he actually offered me more money. So I decided that I wouldn't, I didn't want to go with him. I wanted to go with Casper, because Casper was a really nice guy, and he's dedicated to the art form. He's really a jazz fan, for the lack of a better word. But I think he also plays the saxophone. So I sent him a copy of the interview, of the entire interview, and he got back to me and he said he'd like to use it in a movie. He's working on a movie on Lee Morgan. So I said, okay. He wanted to buy the rights to the interview.
Right.
So we finally came to an agreement. So that's how I met Casper. When Casper got to the point that he wanted to start shooting the flick, he came over to the US. He actually stayed at my pad.
Okay.
The first time he came over by himself, but he hired this photographer, the guy who did the video, the cameraman who did the stuff for Selma. I don't remember his name right now, but he was a really nice guy. And then the second time he came over with a Swedish cat who was a cameraman. And so imagine me riding around with these two cats, Swedish guys, they're speaking Swedish, and I don't understand what they're saying. But we came to Charlotte actually, because I drove him down to Charlotte twice, the first time and the second time, to interview Helen's son, who actually lived in Charlotte. And I drove him down to Wilmington, and he actually did some shooting in Wilmington, because at a certain point, Mrs. Morgan became this church lady. People knew her from being a very good cook. And so we were able to talk to some of the members at her church and did some filming inside the church and did some filming outside the church. Now, Casper couldn't use all of that footage, but he was able to. Inside, if you look at the flick, you'll see there's some footage of the actual church.
Yes.
So that's how I got involved. I hope it didn't go on too long, but that's how I got involved.
No, you're doing fine, man.
In that whole venture, it was really never in a million years would I have thought that the interview that I conducted with Mrs. Morgan would have turned into a movie. Never. That never crossed my mind, because, like I said before, I didn't finish interviewing her. And what I wanted to do was continue the interview. I interviewed her February 1996. I didn't know she had some health issues, and a month later she passed. I didn't know she passed until I talked to Etta Jones, who was appearing here in Chapel Hill. Etta Jones is a very good friend of hers. They would talk a lot of times over the phone. And so I was emceeing a show here in Chapel Hill, and Etta Jones was backstage, and I said, well, I have an interview of a very good friend of yours, Helen Morgan. And so she said, oh, I'd like to listen to that interview. So she finally said, well, Helen has passed. And I didn't know that. And that's how I found out that Mrs. Morgan had passed.
No, it's an interesting story, your interview, and I'm sure we only hear a small piece of it, in the film, but I'm sure it's fascinating, listen the whole thing through.
Oh, yeah.
What, if anything, if you can tell me, brother, what, if anything, was left out of the film from your interview that you wished the filmmakers had included? What didn't they put in that you wish they would have?
I'm not going to touch that, man. I'm not.
Okay, all right.
I'm not a filmmaker, so I don't know, what went into editing it and why he did what he did. I'm not a filmmaker, first of all, so I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that question. But to kind of answer your question, the interview, I used up 2 tapes. I used up 2 30-minute. No, it was a 45. It was a cassette, a regular cassette.
Oh yeah, the C-45s as they used to
I've
call
done
them.
oral history projects before because I've written a book on the Wilmington 10. I'm from
Yeah.
Wilmington. So what happened was she was getting to the, no, it was actually two tapes, so 30 minutes on both sides. Because
Okay.
I flipped the first one. Then I put the other one on, and she was just getting to the juicy part where she was telling me that she shot Lee and the whole 9 yards, and that's when her grandson walked in. So
Yeah.
that's when I wanted to continue the interview.
Hmm.
She really opened up. You know, when I first got to her house, it was a really very cold day in February, but she really, really opened up when she started talking about New York, because she had been living in Wilmington for a while, because she came back to Wilmington to take care of her mother. Her mother was gravely ill. And when I noticed that when she started talking about New York, she kind of lit up. So that's when I just laid back and I didn't say anything. Because I really wanted her to get to the point where she talked about the fact when she shot him and everything. You know, that's what I wanted to. But she opened up, man. She really opened up. Something I think she wanted to get off of her chest.
Yeah, I always found the timing when I first saw the film, and and heard a little bit of your backstory with the interview. I always found it very interesting that it looks like from the time she had you wait, it looked like about 5 or 6 years had passed between the time that you had met her, and the time she finally agreed to the interview. And it was interesting. It happened so close to her death. I wondered, and you, of course, may not know this, did she have an idea that, she had a little bit of time left and decided now was the time to finally tell her story? I'm just wondering, was that the case?
I guess so, yeah. I would think that would be a good way to put it. Because every time that I would see her, I would say, Mrs. Morgan, I'd like to get that interview, because not for a selfish reason or not to be in a movie or anything like that.
Yeah.
The reason why I wanted the interview, because I'm a historian, and I knew it had to have some kind of historical significance, because you read a lot about the story, read a lot about this lady who killed Lee Morgan, but I've never heard her side of the story.
Right.
I've never, and when she told me she was Lee Morgan's wife, I kind of looked at her kind of way, and she looked at me kind of funny, and she said, well, I guess she said to herself, well, this cat knows the story too. People ask me all the time, did I know her on a personal level? But I only knew her as a student, as Mrs. Morgan, the lady who sat up front in the front row in my class. And she never, she was kind of quiet lady. She never really said a lot. But it was a rewarding experience, really, to be in that class, because a lot of those people were people who had really started came back to college, or people who had never been to college before. And she was one of those people who had never been to college before. So she was so proud and excited just to be a student. And I got that vibe, It was really a heartwarming and a very nice experience just to see these people be students, and specifically her. And I think she felt a great sense of accomplishment when she finally got her college degree. So,
sure.
Yeah, I didn't, like, people said, well, did you ever sample her cooking? I didn't know her like that. I understand she was a dynamite cook, but I just didn't know her like that, But it was a blessing, to really, she gained confidence in me, because I used to live in New York, so I knew that whole scene. I was there during the 60s, the late 60s and the early 70s, around the time that, Lee was there.
Yeah.
Around the time of the killing, actually.
Yeah. Let me, so what was it like? I know you had to be, obviously, you made the connection between who she was and her and the history very early on. I'm sure when she said that and told you she's Mrs. Lee Morgan, you put that all together. What was it like to have to sit on that for 5, 6 years? What were some of the things that went through your mind? Says, man, I know you had to be thinking, I wish the sister would just open up and tell me a little bit. What was it like having to wait that long? You're a very patient brother, man.
Well, I am a very patient person. I don't like to make people do things that they don't want to do. I didn't want to make her do anything that she didn't want to do. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I figured she wanted to talk about it. And like I said before, man, I know that whole scene, that whole New York scene, that whole drug scene. I'm a recovering addict. So I knew that whole scene. I think she picked up on that, that I knew that whole scene. You know, and I taught a Western civilization class, but I teach from an African-centered perspective. I don't,
Yeah.
as I said in the flick, I don't begin with the Greeks and the Romans. I go all the way back to the ancient African civilizations. And so she dug that. And one of the things that I like to stress to people about Lee is that Lee was conscious. I don't like to use the word militant. He was a conscious brother. He was woke, as they say these days. You know, if you look at his memorial album, you will notice that he has the Sphinx in the background, and he also has a ring, a red, black, and green ring on. And he came up with these compositions like Mr. Kenyatta,
yes,
dedicated to Jomo Kenyatta. And he came up with the composition Search for a New Land.
Yes.
Understand what I'm saying? And he recorded a tune called Angela, dedicated to Angela Davis.
Angela Davis, yes.
That's one of the reasons why I think you don't hear a lot about Lee Morgan, is because he was quote unquote a rebel. You know, so the establishment didn't want to give him a whole lot of play. Plus he was one of these cats, along with Rashawn Roland Kirk, who crashed the Dick Cavett show. You dig what I'm saying? He was a part of an organization, I think it was called Jazz and People's Party or something. But he crashed the Dick Cavett show and said, well, you gotta hire more African Americans. You gotta hire more Black people on your show. You gotta hire more jazz musicians. So he was like a pioneer. You know, he set the stage for people who were later able to get jobs and able to get gigs on these programs, you know. So he was way ahead of his time. Way ahead of his time. You know,
and
beautiful cat, man. You know, my understanding is that he read the New York Times every day. He was an intellectual. He was a straight A student.
Wow.
You know? A young cat at that age, it's phenomenal, man. Phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, man, the fact that he was able to get up on the stand and hold his own with Dizzy. Right. At age 16, man, that's no joke. He got up there with the big boys, you know. Talking about not only Diz, Joe Gordon, and all those other cats who were up in his trumpet section, then, and he stepped right in, man.
I was a good friend of Jimmy Heath and Tootie Heath. Jimmy's father was actually born in Wilmington, North Carolina. So was Percy. So I was very good friends with those guys. And they knew Lee when Lee first started out. They said that Lee was blowing hot at age 12. He was knocking them dead at age 12, man.
Wow, man.
Age 12, you know, so he was a teenage wonder. But I was thoroughly impressed with his compositional skills, and I was thoroughly impressed with his, you know, his foresight.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? His foresight. He was like way ahead in terms of thinking that way, you know, and this was during, you know, the late 60s and the early 70s when people who had nerve and balls weren't afraid to speak on the situation. You know, we got to understand what went down after the late 60s, you know. For him to be that vocal, and I don't like the word militant, I don't use the word militant.
Yeah.
You know, but he was, because I asked Miss Morgan, I said, well, was he a militant? She said, oh yeah. Right away, she said, oh yeah, no doubt. I think she was too. You know, that's why she gravitated to what I was doing.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of my African-centric approach to the world, you know, because most of the students in the class thought I was probably a nut. You know, because I told them that Jesus was a Black man and, you know, the cradle of civilization was Africa. But she picked up on that. And I think what I'm trying to tell you, my man, is all of that played into her trusting me.
Yeah.
You know, and realizing that she could give me an interview. If she would grab me an interview, and it was all, she didn't buy anything. I mean, she just let it all hang out. She told me all these stories, how she met Miles, how she met Billie Holiday, how she met John Coltrane, how she met, because I said, well, drop some names. And she started dropping all these names. And she showed me her collection, her record collection.
Wow.
You know, she had, you know, Dexter's my man. She had Dexter, she had all these, she liked these saxophone players. You know, she gave me her collection, you know. She said, take them and play them on your show. She had been listening to my program because I did an evening jazz show at the local public radio station in Wilmington. and she had been listening to my show, so she knew that I had quote unquote taste. I knew what the deal was, you know. So, you know, I like bebop, man. I don't know.
Me too, man.
I play straight ahead stuff. I don't deal with that other funny stuff. And so she dug that. And I think that was one of the reasons why she, you know, she trusted me. She liked me.
Yeah.
She called me Larry. Most of the students in the class called me Larry. They called me Mr. Thomas. So I guess I became one of the cats.
Yeah, well, I guess you were, man, because you had to have developed some kind of trust, because she obviously knew the value of what it is that she had to share. And the fact that she chose at that point to share it with you is a testimony to you. So, you know, I give you a lot of credit in that one. Let's talk a little bit about your book, because in addition to being involved with the film and the interview that, or I should say the post that you originally wrote on it, you did complete a book essentially about Helen Morgan, simply called The Lady Who Shot Lee Morgan. And tell us a little bit, if you could, Larry, about the book, some of the additional things that you included in it, any additional research that you did to bring the book home.
Well, what I decided to do, brother, was to write a book, because I just wanted to write a book about my experiences, my experience with that whole affair. So I divided it up into 5 chapters. I also wrote a poem. There's a poem at the end of it. And the poem is called Cold Night in New York City, because it was ironic that she met him on a cold night in New York City, and she killed him on a cold night in New York City. So I think I have a book in front of me. It's called, I did 5 chapters. One is the lady, one is the interview, and then I put the article in the middle. And I did the movie. I think the last chapter is A Cold Night in New York City. So it was just something that I had to do, you know, for my own sanity, I guess, to get it out and to let people read about my experience, that whole experience, just being in her presence, really. She was a really nice lady. I think she was very remorseful. I think she basically died of a broken heart.
Yeah, so I do want to get back to that, because that's definitely something I want to talk about, your perspective, but I want to make sure that those who might be interested in getting a copy of the book, and I'm telling you folks, if you want to delve further into understanding of not only of Helen Morgan, but of the whole situation, in this case, stopping just at the film, which is an excellent one, will not do it justice. I think you owe it to yourself to pick up a copy of Brother Thomas's book here. So is it available? Put it this way, I know there's a lot of ways. What's the best way? We'll put it that way, brother. What's the best way for them to get a copy?
Send me an email. My email address is lrt0393@hotmail.com.
Okay.
That's lrt0393@hotmail.com. Now, if you go to these other sites, they're going to rip you off. I don't charge that much for the book. But if you go to these other sites, they're going to, try to stick it to you.
No, I will. Go ahead.
I have another book called The True Story Behind the Wilmington 10, which is on Amazon. Somebody's trying to sell that book for $902.
Wow. Well, I saw copies I was testing that because I saw copies on Amazon, and Amazon is selling your book, and they're talking about starting at $65.
Yeah,
so I know
I don't want that much, homie. I wouldn't do that. No,
I believe.
And it's written in the first person.
Pardon?
It's written in the first person.
Yeah.
I wrote it in the first person.
Okay.
Miss Morgan was a fascinating lady. She had her first child at 13 and the other one at 14. And then she left them with her parents. She's actually from a place called Charlotte, North Carolina, which is right across the Cape Fear River from Wilmington. She left Wilmington. She left her children with her grandparents. Casper actually has some shots of Charlotte inside the movie. And she left them with her grandparents. Her grandparents raised her children.
Hmm.
She moved to Wilmington and married a bootlegger.
Hmm.
She was 17 and the bootlegger was 39.
Hello, yeah, I remember that in the movie being mentioned.
And she walked in the bedroom once and saw a pile of money on the bed. And I said, oh, it was love at first sight. She said, no, he fell in love with me and I fell in love with the money.
Well.
and then shortly after that, maybe 2 years after that, he died. He was drowned. Her son told me later on that he didn't drown, that Helen told him that she stabbed him. This is all this is in the book.
Okay, now.
Well, see, I'm a historian.
Yeah.
And as a historian, I found out that there are three sides to every story. There's one side, the other side, and the truth is somewhere in the middle.
There you go.
You dig what I'm saying?
I dig, man.
I don't know who to believe.
But you at least want to make sure that all sides of the story get out there.
Exactly, right.
That's it, man. So let's talk a little bit about, let's jump back to Mrs. Morgan. And you said you believe she died of a broken heart. What perspective did you get, or what was the feeling as you were listening to her tell this painful story? I mean, even though you didn't get into it as much as you wanted to, but when she told that painful story about that last night of Lee Morgan's life, and you got from that she died of a broken heart, what were some of the things that she said or did that led you to believe that?
Well, Lee had been cutting out on her real tough.
Yeah.
You know, and matter of fact, she said that he would leave the apartment and stay away for a long time, would only come there at certain times. And that really hurt her. And so she tried to talk him into, leaving, just leave her alone. She wanted him to leave her alone. And as a matter of fact, she said she was going to move to Chicago. And she said that Lee begged her not to go to Chicago. So she stayed. And one of the statements she made that has always stuck out with me was, she said, you know, Lee, I think I'm making the biggest mistake of my life by staying here, right? So when Lee was cutting out on her, she was left at the apartment all alone, and it really hurt her. I think it really hurt her. And I think she loved him. You know, but I tell you one thing that was very interesting. When we began our interview, the first thing she said to me was, you know, Larry, I don't know if I loved him or if I thought of him as my possession. That kind of really blew my mind because she was like much, much older than Lee Morgan. She could, when she first saw him, she called him a little boy, you know. But I think she wanted that relationship to work, but it wasn't working because, you know, number one, he was cutting out on her. And he started making a little bit more money. And Lee was supposed to be on methadone. And I know that whole scene. She said he was, quote unquote, shooting tremendous amount of cocaine. So he was still shooting drugs. You know, like I said, I've been at the whole drug scene. I was in New York around that time. And there was no heroin on the street. So a lot of the junkies, you know, when you're a junkie, you gotta shoot something. But they were shooting cocaine. So I believe her when she said that he was shooting cocaine. So she was nagging him about shooting so much cocaine. And she said herself that it had gotten to the point where Lee was thinking of her as his mother instead of his woman. You know, that's when he started dating this younger girl and going out with this younger girl. And I think he was contemplating leaving her. So I think what she really wanted the thing to work.
Yeah. And
then when it didn't work, she just snapped. She said, I don't know if Casper put that in the movie or not, but there's a lot of footage I got. A lot of this stuff. I mean, he just used a little bit of it. So she said she lost it. She lost her composure, and that she ran over to him and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't. She said, Now, Paul West, I turned
Yeah.
Casper onto Paul West because I met Paul West came to North Carolina to play with Jimmy Heath one time, and Jimmy brought Paul with him to play bass. And Jimmy said, Larry, you need to talk to Paul West. He said, because Paul West was sitting in Slugs when Helen killed
That night, yeah.
So I turned Paul West onto Casper. Paul West, Helen said that she ran over to Lee, he's laying on the ground, and she says, Lee, why did you make me do this? Why did you make me shoot you? Because he was showing off in front of her. He had her kicked out of the bar and everything. So she said, why did you make me do this? And Paul West said, these are three stories now. Paul West said, I think Paul West said something to the point that Helen said, why did you make me do this? Or something like, no, to the, like Lee said, what? No, Lee said, get away from me, you dirty bitch.
Yep, I heard that.
That's what Lee said. And he said that Paul West said something else different. Said there 3 sides there. Paul West said something different than Helen. But the reason why I said, I think she really wanted that relationship to work. She wanted it to work, but it wasn't working. Number one, because she was much, much older than Lee.
Yeah.
She was getting old, she wanted a lover. And he considered her at that point because she kept nagging him about using these drugs. He was still shooting drugs, man.
Yeah.
Still shooting cocaine, according to her.
Yeah.
And to me, that's conceivable because I was in New York at the time. And as I said before, I knew that scene and the junkies were doing that. So that's conceivable, So I think she died of a broken heart because she wanted that relationship to work and it didn't work out. That's why, that's my opinion.
And you can easily see, of course, not saying that it should have happened, but from the setup of the situation, even as it's explained in the film and everything I've heard, not only she was brokenhearted over that, according to what is said in the film, the young woman in question was in the club with Lee that night. And when she showed up to confront him, he put her out into a blizzard without her coat.
That's right.
And as Shakespeare said, hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn. And it was a public humiliation on top of it,
Right.
So, everything was there, was unfortunate, but all the situation was there. You can see a person getting, just snapping at that point. And,
yeah, well, she said she snapped.
Yeah.
She said, I lost it. She lost it. People, a lot of the cats were really ticked off at me. A lot of the cats were ticked off at me for interviewing her. When I told Jimmy that I had to interview, Jimmy said, who wants to hear what a murderer has to say?
That sounds like him, man.
So, and then what happened was once they saw the flick and Casper did a masterful job of putting it together.
He did.
A lot of the cats, once they saw the flick, they said they got some kind of closure out of it because they were able to see both sides, her side and his side, how it led up to that. And it's an exclusive interview. Nobody has that information. Nobody has her side of the story. So that was really a blessing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk a little bit. We're going to get to audience. If you have questions, first, thank you all for being here. But if you have questions, get them ready. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. But I feel like we hadn't done our job if we didn't talk a little bit about the music of Lee Morgan. You being a fan of his music, as am I as well. And just talking a little bit about his musical direction around the time of his death. I remember in one of my favorite albums of Charles Erlin's is that one that Lee appears on, his last recordings,
That's
2 days before his death, Intensity,
Right.
And I feel like what I hear out of Lee is something a little bit different there. Yeah, I've grown up on his stuff with the Messengers and everything there, but I feel like he was heading in a little bit of a different direction, not toward free jazz, but something different than what we've gotten from Lee Morgan in the past decade or so. What are your thoughts on him musically?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you just said, man. I think he was
Yeah.
moving in another direction. I think he was moving in the same direction that Miles is moving in.
Hmm.
Because even with all that other stuff that's going on in the background, with Miles, you still can say that's Miles. You
Yeah.
know, and the same thing with Lee. You know, no matter what's going on, you can say, well, that's Lee, because
Hmm.
he had that distinctive sound. But yeah, I agree with what you just said. You know, but my thing is his consciousness.
Yeah.
You dig what I'm saying? His being woke. You know, he was on point in terms of the title of the tunes, in terms of because this music, I don't call it jazz. Jazz is short for jackass. That name was given to me by racists. I call it American classical music. Lee, even in the movie, Lee calls it black classical music.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that this music is the tenor of the times. It's a reflection of what's going on in society. You dig what I'm saying? You know, like people call fusion music, which I call confusion music. You know, and you know, like when Miles came out with Bitches Brew, you could hear that tension. It's a reflection of what was going on in the 70s. In 69 was a very crucial year.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of what's going on. So Lee was reflecting what was going on in society at that particular. It's a 10 of the time. So I agree with you. Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I like bebop, man. I like 4/4. I like for it to swing.
Me too, brother.
I
Yeah,
like the
that's what I
element of
grew up
swing.
with. Yeah.
To me, swing is the music of the future. You know,
There you
to me,
go.
you know, because it moves straight ahead. You know, it's a focused music. It moves straight ahead. So, you know, I guess that's what I did, man. You know.
All right. Well, as Ray Brown said, and I think you titled an album after this, it don't mean a thing if you can't pat your foot to it.
I
So,
hear, right. A snap your finger, or move your
yeah,
head, or smile.
yeah, that's it. Or Dizzy talked about the meaning of that word. Yeah, he said, when you say yeah about something, that means you reach something deep down, and that's that swing, man. That's what that's all about. So I'm going to give the audience. I know we have at least one lady who did put in, at least into the chat, that her hand is raised. And I know we have a few others. So going to please give the opportunity for the audience. And Lonnie, if you can just let us know who's next, who has a question for our special guest, Mr. Larry Reni Thomas. So Lonnie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Curtis. And thank you, Larry. I just wanted to make a comment before I opened it up for questions. And that is, since I really started listening to this music back in school, and I discovered Lee Morgan, he was one of my favorites from the very, very beginning. And when I learned about the circumstances around his death, I mean, you hear all types of stories when you're, a kid. People say, oh, he got shot on the bandstand, or, I heard one person say that, he got shot through the bell of his horn, while he was on stage. Like, people, the stories, are endless, but nonetheless, they're all tragic. And I had a lot of anger as well, because I thought of him as a hero and a genius, and that really did so much for the music. And I really didn't understand how that, could happen. But I think, I really appreciate the information that you're sharing with us tonight, because it does, for me, it also adds closure, and makes me realize that there are two sides of the story, and they're all human, and nobody is perfect.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you, Larry, for
you.
joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Great. Awesome. All right. So let us go to Rebecca, and we're going to go ahead and allow Rebecca to ask her question directly. Let's see. All right, Rebecca, you are on.
Hey, Larry, this is an amazing honor. I wanted to get your perspective on, we heard from a guest a few weeks ago, this idea of drugs being infused, and it's not unique that it was a key downfall of the middle of his life to musicians. So I was curious if you have any thoughts around why that might be the case. Is it the place? Is it the lifestyle? Is it the times and the social issues that they were trying to face? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Sure, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I could sum it up in one word: COINTELPRO. They targeted the Black communities during the 60s to destroy the Black consciousness movement. There was no, when I first went to New York as a drug addict, the first place I went to was 116th Street and 8th Avenue. That wasn't by accident. It was by design. Jackie McLean has a movie out, a documentary movie out now called, I think it's called something about Mars. And he says the same thing. It was no accident that if you wanted drugs, you went to 116th Street and 8th Avenue. That's in Harlem. So this was an attempt, a successful attempt, to destroy the Black consciousness movement. And they do it every time. They stifle. Lee Morgan was an intellectual. Most heroin addicts and most musicians that I've ever met were intellectuals, par excellence. You know, I was like a fly on the wall. I would always sit backstage and listen to these guys. And they knew all about all the current events, everything that was going on. You know, so I think it's by design that you give these people drugs. Mrs. Morgan talked about that extensively in the interview. And I also put that in my book. Drugs were everywhere. You know, you go backstage, it's a buffet style, whatever you want. You know, so it's and they get it from the club owners, they get it from the agents, they get it from the record recordings. When they go to the record recording studios, it's buffet style. You know, it's a setup. So to get them strung out, so they, you know, sometimes when they get ready to get paid, they don't get paid because they've used all their tab. They pay them in drugs. There's an excellent book out now by Gerald Horn. It's called Jazz and Justice. I would recommend that people get that book.
Jazz and Justice?
Jazz and Justice is the name of the book. That's the title. There's a subtitle, I think, something about racism and exploitation of musicians. So this is by design. It's no accident that these people are drug addicts. It's not an accident. That's by design. Thanks for the question.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. We have another question, and it is from Cheryl. So Cheryl, I will unmute you, and you can go ahead and speak with our guests directly. All right,
Thank
you're
you.
on, Cheryl. There you go.
Okay, and it's actually Sherelle, like the 60s group.
Okay. Sure.
I am Helen's granddaughter. Her oldest granddaughter.
Uh-oh.
So a couple of things. One, I wanted to thank Larry for the movie. My grandmother, Helen, who she did like to be called grandma, she wanted to be called Helen. One, being able to hear her voice. But two, what you guys don't know, my dad passed away not too long after the movie came out, and he had a stroke. So him not being able to talk and to be able to hear his voice and see him live means a whole lot to me and my siblings. The other piece, just a correction, my dad was actually raised by another family.
Yeah, he did tell me that. Yeah, he did tell me.
Yeah, so he did not meet Helen until he was in the military. So he was about 18 years old when he met Helen.
Yeah.
So it's really the question that I have, and I wish I could hear all of the tapes of her voice. So did you save any of the tapes or copies yourself?
Yeah, I'll give you a copy, sure. You can get a copy.
Okay, that would be fantastic.
Are you in Charlotte or California?
I'm in Charlotte. My youngest sister, who looks just like Ruth, is in California, and then I have a brother in Texas, and there are three of us here in Charlotte.
Well, who's in California? Is that your brother that's in California? He contacted me.
Yeah, Hansi, he actually lives in Texas now. So,
Really?
but yeah, so it's
He's your brother.
He is my brother. Yes, my dad had two families, two wives. So two separate families. So I am the oldest of all of the children.
Oh,
I'm the oldest daughter. So
to meet you.
so it really wasn't a question, more so a comment. Just thank you. And yes, do you have the tapes? Because would love to get a copy of it.
Yeah, well,
To have.
send me an email. I'll make sure you get one.
I will do that. I will do that. But again, just thank you for this. This is just great to hear those stories. And I've heard stories, and I remember living when Helen got out of jail, came to live with us, and the year I was in the 3rd grade, and I shared a room with her. And so she was definitely a character. She was care, but she knew she was going to pass away because she called my dad down to Wilmington about 2 weeks before she died. And I think that the film did sort of take that pressure off of her that she had carried for a long time, along with even the guilt that she had about having to give my dad up when he was just a baby. So all of that together. But I think the film was the interview, not the film. The interview was a healing for her. It was a healing for her. And I remember my dad even talking about a lot of that occurred in that month of February, the months of February and March for her. So yes, she knew. I believe that she knew her time was up. I do believe that. So thank you. I'm done.
And thank you, Ms. Harrison, for being with us, for adding so much to what we've done this evening. And I just also want to add something that I thought was so poignant that your father said in the film about him first meeting Helen, when he walked into the room of 3 women there and he immediately recognized his mother. I just love that. That's one of my favorite parts of it.
Yeah, and it was a tough thing for him because it was as if she had just seen him yesterday. And if you can imagine her and her voice saying to her friends, ladies, this is my son. So it was hard, but I remember some of the things as a child, some of the stuff that was going on because I was about 6 or 7 when it occurred. Seems like I remember little images of him, like childhood images, but not enough to say, yes, that was him, but definitely his music. And always loved his music, always have. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sherelle. Let's see. Our next question will come from Kevin Patterson. Mr. Kevin, I will unmute.
Hello, everybody.
There you go.
Hello,
Yes, I'm here. How's everybody doing?
Yeah.
First of all, this was outstanding conversation. Larry, just amazing tape, and also love your energy and talking about history and the Afrocentric piece of it. But 2 questions. Number one, through the hour and a half of whatever tape that you have, what was the one thing that surprised you the most? So I want you to delve into that, and then to either Curtis or you, Larry. Lee Morgan, when you talk about his artistry, what set him apart from other trumpeters during that time?
Well, to answer your question, what surprised me the most was how candid she was. She just opened up. She got real personal, she told me a lot of stories relating to musicians, and she told me this one story about Jerry Mulligan, because once they moved up to the Bronx, they moved on the Grand Concourse, and during those days, the Grand Concourse was really a big deal. And she had a party one night, and Jerry Mulligan was there. And mind you, this is during the 60s, late 60s, and he was the only white cat in there. So she said, who is this white guy? Who is this white guy? So she said, somebody told, and she was, how we just talked, yeah, nigga, this and that. So she did like this, and so she said, well, I done said it now. She was the character. So she said, somebody said, that's Jerry Mulligan. She said, so? Yeah, she just like the sister just said, she was a character. Once Mrs. Morgan opened up, man, I couldn't stop her. She got very candid. She told me a whole lot of stories. Matter of fact, I was laughing throughout the entire interview because she just trusted me. She just trusted me like I was just one of the cats. She just, because I know that whole scene. She could tell I knew that whole scene, So she just opened up. She was very, very candid. Very candid. Yeah. But in terms of the second question, I think when people listen to Lee Morgan, they hear that piercing sound. It just pierces. It goes straight through you. And there's no way not to not listen to it, because it's just like he's on fire, man.
Oh.
like it's the last
day,
like it's his last day on earth. He's got to get it out there. So that's what I hear when I hear Lee Morgan. Right away I say, well, that's Lee Morgan.
And Kevin, if I can jump in on that same question and just make it succinct, what for me with Lee Morgan, when I heard his entry notes of his solo on Moanin', the way his attack, the way he hit it, that piercing sound, the brashness that all came through in that's the first track I ever remember hearing from Lee Morgan. And right from then, his solo on Moanin' with the Messengers, I was hooked. And when I found that sound, that tone, that confidence that announced, I am here to stay, and heard it like from no other. So that's for me. Since you included me in the question, Kevin, you're also gonna get mine, man. So that's what also attracted me to his playing. But thank you for the questions, Kevin.
All right, thank you, Kevin. We have another question, and the next question will be from Al. So Al, you are up, sir.
Thank you. Hey, Larry, how you doing?
Hey, Al, my man.
Hey, I missed your show Sunday night, but I'm gonna catch it on Radio Free America.
All right, do that. He's a loyal listener.
All right, man.
Great show. If you guys hadn't heard his show, you can listen to it every Sunday night, right?
Right,
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
On the internet. My thoughts, Larry, a couple things. One, I like what you did with your book, and which came out in the movie, and it really put a human touch and kind of showed the loving spirit I think Helen had. And that came out to me very obviously in the movie. Mm-hmm. That she had this loving spirit. She took a dope fiend in, basically, and that's what Lee was at that point in his life. Took him in and helped make him better. And also what comes out in the film to me is that while a lot of the musicians disliked Helen for obviously killing him, they had to pay homage to the fact that she really saved him. Right. And he might have been dead many, many years before she actually shot him. Right. That's the one thing that I get out of the film, that, it really put a human side on her. And a lot of times when these stories, you never get the side of the person that maybe committed the act. You just kind of see all the negativity, but you don't really get to understand anything about that person. And that really came out in the book, which I've read a few times, and I've certainly seen the movie. Sometimes I actually play it as background. I've seen it so many times. But it's just a great work, and I'm a big Lee Morgan fan, and I always had been, but never really knew that he had been shot by a woman he was involved with, but never really knew the story, never really dug down in it. Much like the Sam Cooke story, he got shot by a woman, and there's a lot of stuff related to that. And of course, there's been a documentary on it within the last few years. I think it's also on Netflix. And if you hadn't watched it, that's a good one to watch as well.
It is, yes.
One of the things, Larry, I think the last time we really talked, and I had asked you this question, or were you aware, or was even Helen aware, that Lee had family in North Carolina during the time she went back to Wilmington. Lee's brother lived over in Fayetteville.
Right.
In fact, I got a couple of frat brothers that one served in the Army. He was retired military airborne. And his name was Otto Morgan, lived over in Fayetteville. And I think his wife is still alive, but I know his son still lives down there. And his son was also good friends with another frat brother of mine. They went to high school together and both went to Fayetteville State. So I've had some conversation with him, as well as I'm a Facebook friend of also one of Lee's nephews that lives in Philly. And he went to A&T undergrad. But I didn't think you were aware, and I didn't know if Helen was aware that Lee had family so close to her, with her living down in Wilmington. They lived over in Fayetteville. And I did ask Otto's son, which is Lee's nephew, did they know that she was in North Carolina. He indicated to me that they did. The family did kind of know she was back in North Carolina. And, you know, obviously they have some different kind of feelings about that whole situation, as you would expect.
Sure.
But she really did save him, I believe, for us to get several more years of music from the genius that he was. So I just wanted to tell you that. Great book, great movie, and you were a part of it.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Lonnie, do we have time? Do we have one more question?
Yes, we do have one more. We have a question from Bradley. So let's see, Mr. Bradley. You are up, sir.
Hey, Larry, a couple things, man. I'm from the ATL, Decatur. I grew up there with my whole family. I've lived there a long time, and also went to Chapel Hill, so I met you before in Chapel Hill.
Okay.
I'm a little older now, though.
I hope so.
Yeah, nice to see you again. Yeah, nice seeing you again. But I just wanted to ask you, what's your favorite song you sang? Because I love Cornbread. My grandmother used to play that for me when I was growing up. So I just wondered what your favorite jam was. That's it. And tell hello to you.
All right, thanks, man. Oh, I like Mr. Kenyatta. I like Search for the New Land. Those the ones that I just mentioned. I like Shortcut. You know, I like that the Sixth Sense album.
Yes.
Put that on it and let it roll. That's a really nice album. You know, I like hot licks, man. Yeah. Let me say one thing about Helen. A lot of when Al spoke about her relatives. A lot of the relatives badmouth Casper at the screening. I wasn't there, but one of her relatives, who was from New Jersey somewhere, got up and said that Casper was a cultural bandit and he jumped in Casper's case. One of the things that I got out of, and I've actually gotten a nasty email from somebody in his family. One of the things I think they're pissed off about is the fact that they thought Helen was receiving royalties from Lee's music. But she never got any royalties because she was his common law wife.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he married a Japanese American girl.
Yamamoto.
In Chicago. She receives the royalties today. So she's the one, she's getting big paychecks. And a lot of the musicians, I don't know if the family's aware of that, maybe they are, but a lot of musicians don't like that fact either, that because they're never divorced. So she's getting the royalties. That's one thing I like to clear up with people, that Helen never received a dime, you know. And I was very impressed with her because she did the work of a person who might have a MBA, because she set up all the gigs, she set up the airplane flights, she set up the accommodations and everything. So for a lady who, I don't know if she had a high school education or not, to do that was phenomenal, noteworthy at the least.
Absolutely. And on top of that, she put miles on his place. So.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, but she did, yeah, right, you know. And one other thing, people ask me, whose side am I on? I'm not on anybody's side. I'm on the side of history.
That's right.
I'm not on her side, I'm not on Lee's side, I'm on the side of history. I'm a historian. So I'm not on anybody's side.
That's right.
You dig?
Well said, sir. Appreciate you, my brother. It's come toward the end of our time. I just want to, before we go to wrap up, a couple of things. First of all, thank you to Brother Larry Reni Thomas for spending this time with us this evening. This has been outstanding. I mean, another great conversation, additional perspective. You have given us another level to an already great film, and I appreciate you, my brother, for that, and thank you for spending this time. Also, do not forget, folks, if you want to get a copy, and I'm telling you, you should, if you want to get the complete story and even more on what started, and I Called Him Morgan, you want to pick up a copy of Larry Reni Thomas's book, The Lady Who Shot Lee Morgan. Brother Larry, can you give him your email address once again as the best and most reasonably priced way to receive a copy of your book?
Yeah, it's LRT, my initials, 0393 at hotmail.com. That's LRT 0393 at hotmail.com. So send me an email and I'll send you an autographed copy. Not for $100 though.
No, we appreciate that. Also, do listen in if you get a chance to an outstanding radio show that Brother Thomas hosts on Sunday nights. It's on WCOM-FM. That is a web-based station, and it's on Sunday nights, 9 p.m. till 12 p.m., Sunday Night Jazz. Now, best way to reach that is to go to the web. Should they go to WCOM, Larry?
FM.org, yeah, WCOMFM.org.
WCOMFM.org.
Right.
Take an opportunity to listen in there as well. Lonnie, I think you might want to have some closing comments, but I always make my closing. Oh yes, please do make sure to tune in, as we'll be back with Conversations with Curtis next Tuesday at the same time at 8 p.m. My special guest then will be considered by many to be one of the finest young jazz writers working under 40. She did an outstanding project last year called the 1959 Project. We'll talk about that and much more. And that is Ms. Natalie Weiner, and she will be with us at 8 p.m. next Tuesday night. You can hear me always, all times, now and forever at my station, and that is Kurt Jazz Radio at kurtjazz.com and also on Live 365. I thank you all, as always, for spending this time with us. Thanks again to Brother Larry Reni Thomas.
Thank you, brother.
All right, and Lonnie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Curtis, and thank you once again, Larry, for joining us for this so valuable conversation we had this evening. And this is on the eve of Lee Morgan's birthday, which is Friday, July 10th. So if you don't know much about Lee Morgan's music, please do check out some of his albums and you'll understand why, this is such an important conversation for us to be having. But I want to thank you guys for joining us, and just wanted to remind you that this is all presented by JazzArts Charlotte. We're a nonprofit organization here in North Carolina, Charlotte, and we are about connecting the community, developing a jazz audience, and we do that through quality education, performance, and musician support. And if you are interested in supporting this organization, please go to our website at thejazzarts.org. And I do want to thank our sponsors and our current donors for already supporting our program. So thank you guys, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Peace.
Good night. Peace.